Do you have recommendations for people who are currently on medications about like how to do this other than like weaning down and locking yourself in a room? Like there's got to be something. There's got to be resources.
I mean, there are resources, but they're certainly not perfect, and they're very much in their infancy. And so it's kind of one of those things where, I'm happy to kind of let people know what the latest stuff is. But at the end of the day, I think what antidepressant withdrawal and depression and all of this stuff really asks you to do is to go inward and find what works for you. I mean, you know all about that, right? With the lion diet, right? Like it might not work for everyone, but it's been a lifesaver for you. So like that, the amount of inner resilience and inner gumption you have to have in order to make that sort of choice for yourself, despite what other people say, is huge. And that's what I think that's in a lot of ways what healthy mental health is. It's figuring out what each individual needs. So, for example, like the main theory right now with antidepressant withdrawal and how to avoid it or how to get off these drugs safely is something called hyperbolic tapering. It's basically a dose reduction method. It ends up looking like a hyperbolic curve, so one that starts off very steep and ends up flatter, because you make percentages of cuts for each drug. So say you're on 100 milligrams of something, you cut it by 10%. You cut it by 10%, so you go down to 90 milligrams. And then assuming you're doing okay, you cut that another 10%. So 10% of 90 milligrams is 9 grams. So now you're down to 81, and so on and so forth until the doses get smaller and smaller. And the reason why this tends to be more successful in the early research they've done is just because it allows the brain and body to basically stabilize at an easier rate instead of having to make these big jumps in between the typical pharmaceutical doses. This isn't perfect. There are still people who struggle on these, and have serious symptoms even while doing hyperbolic tapering, but it's a start. So I would say, Google that, read the research on that. Also Mad in America is an amazing resource. So is Anatomy of an Epidemic by Robert Whittaker. There's just a lot of information there that I think patients can help educate themselves and then go take them to their doctor, take the information to their doctor and say, like, because you still need a doctor to fill your prescriptions and help you go down. So, the best course of action is going to be a partnership. If you have a doctor who's completely dismissive of what you want for yourself, and also, information, continuing education on how you can hopefully get through this as best as possible. If you've got a doctor who's fighting that, it's time to find a new doctor. Like, it's time to step up and take some agency and say, no, we're not doing this together, and, go off and find a new one. So, and that's kind of it at this point, other than just, it's so sad, but other than just, reading the room, reading anecdotes a little bit, we've seen a lot more mainstream articles about antidepressant withdrawal and, New York Times and the New Yorker and New York Post and all of these very traditionally, medication all the time people. So I'm glad to see that means the shift is changing. Or I mean, there's a change. Oh God, glad to see that there's, a change in the narrative there. There's also a lot more research being done in Europe and the UK than there is here in the US. So sometimes you have to go outside of the US. And, but yeah, beyond that, I mean, it's a dark world out there. But it's I don't know, for me, it was the best decision I ever made to get off these drugs. Yes, it's very scary.
Me too.
It's a scary thing. And I, on the one hand, I want people to be really aware of what can happen, so they don't think that they are schizophrenic suddenly, right?
Yeah.
And yes, it can be really, really difficult, but it is the single best thing I've ever done for myself, even though it was the hardest thing I've ever been through. And my life is so much better. I'm so glad I did it.
Yeah, for sure. This by no means don't do it. You're stuck on this forever. It just means, first of all, cold turkey is so dangerous, and it's not even just that the withdrawal is sudden and much worse. Mm-hmm. It can also trigger secondary things like akathisia in certain people, and not everybody gets that, but in certain people that can happen. And once you trigger something like that, going back on the medication doesn't necessarily get rid of it. So the cold turkey thing can be very dangerous, especially if you've been on a high dose for a long period of time. But getting off of them, I was experiencing a lot of side effects that I had been attributing to my autoimmune disorder.
I was just about to say
my entire life.
I was just about to say, like, how interesting it is how all your other issues, at least for me, like, directly connected back to this. It's such a systemic thing, and we really think we think it's only about our emotions and our feelings, right? And it's just not. It's completely systemic.